Over the North Atlantic on August 14, 1942, roughly 200 miles southwest of Iceland, the grey waters stretched endlessly beneath a matching sky. Visibility extended for miles across the empty expanse, broken only by the white foam of swells that rolled in endless succession. Second Lieutenant Elza Shahan sat tight in the cramped cockpit of his P-38F Lightning, oxygen mask secure against his face, eyes fixed on the horizon framed by the aircraft's distinctive twin booms. The view through that unusual silhouette shaped his entire field of vision. Major John Wiltzman flew in formation nearby, piloting another Lightning. Hours had passed in monotonous patrol work, nothing but grey upon grey, interrupted only by the constant rumble of twin Allison engines cutting through the air. Then both pilots saw it simultaneously, a dark shape materializing along the horizon, gradually growing larger as it approached. It was a Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor, the German four-engine maritime patrol bomber, heading home after stalking Allied convoy routes across the ocean. A Royal Air Force Northrop Nomad had spotted the Condor first, tracking it and radioing its position to nearby American fighters. Lieutenant Joseph Schaffer, flying a P-40 Warhawk, had initiated the attack moments before. His machine guns tore into the German bomber. Smoke immediately began pouring from one of the Condor's engines. Then Hahn and Wiltzman pushed their throttles to the maximum, and their P-38s surged ahead with an acceleration that single-engine fighters simply could not deliver. They climbed into range and opened fire. The concentrated firepower from their machine guns and 120mm cannons, all mounted in the nose where they converged on a single point, raked across the German aircraft. The Condor's fuselage erupted into flames. The massive bomber pitched downward, tumbling toward the Atlantic below. One of the American pilots circled once to confirm the kill, then banked back toward Iceland. They had just become part of something historically significant: the destruction of the first Luftwaffe aircraft ever shot down by United States Army Air Force's fighters. The P-38 Lightning that had delivered those final devastating strikes would soon develop a fearsome reputation that would force German pilots to completely reconsider everything they believed about twin-engine fighters. What the Luftwaffe didn't yet grasp was that this peculiar American design would demonstrate conclusively that two engines weren't a weakness in air combat. They represented an enormous tactical advantage. Lockheed's engineers had already worked out the calculations on their blueprints, but German fighter aces would need to discover the truth through the hardest possible method: aerial combat itself. Just 3 months earlier, the German fighter pilot community had begun receiving reports about this new American fighter entering service. Intelligence photographs revealed an aircraft that looked utterly foreign to anyone accustomed to European skies. Twin engines housed in streamlined booms extending backward from the wings, a central fuselage containing the pilot and weapons, landing gear with a nose wheel instead of a tail skid. The entire configuration violated what Luftwaffe tacticians considered fundamental principles of fighter design. Major Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most accomplished fighter commanders, examined those intelligence reports at Jagdgeschwader 26 headquarters in France. The initial assessment seemed obvious. Twin-engine fighters had inherent disadvantages compared to single-engine designs in dogfighting situations. The Messerschmitt Bf 110 Zerstörer had proven this repeatedly: cumbersome, ponderous, unable to maneuver effectively. Quick prey for the nimble Spitfires and Hurricanes piloted by British aces. The P-38 appeared to suffer from identical fundamental weaknesses, only magnified. It weighed over 10 tons fully loaded with fuel and ammunition, nearly double the weight of a P-51 Mustang. Its twin-boom configuration generated tremendous drag. The separation between engines created serious asymmetrical thrust issues if one engine failed. The centerline weapons pod sat far removed from the pilot's natural sightline, making accurate aiming problematic. German fighter pilots examining those first intelligence photographs couldn't help but laugh. The Americans had essentially built a reconnaissance platform, nothing more, possibly useful for extended patrol missions, but certainly not a fighter capable of challenging the Bf-109 or FW-190 in actual combat. This evaluation would prove catastrophically mistaken. Over Tunis in North Africa on November 19, 1942, When morning light had barely cleared the horizon, 18 Lightnings from the 1st and 14th Fighter Groups escorted B-17 flying fortresses toward targets in Tunisia. Oberfeldwebel Franz Schiess, commanding elements of Jagdgeschwader 53, spotted the American formation cruising at 20,000 feet. His Bf-109G carried the accumulated experience of 140 combat missions. He had already scored 19 victories against British and Soviet aircraft. Now he would encounter these peculiar twin-engine American fighters for the very first time. Schiess maneuvered his unit above and behind the P-38s, following standard German tactics for engaging twin-engine aircraft. An attack from the rear and above, where the Zerstörer's limited agility made them vulnerable. The Bf-109s dived. What followed shattered every assumption Schiess held about twin-engine fighters. The P-38 pilots detected the diving Germans immediately. Rather than holding formation in a defensive formation, they wheeled hard into the attack. The Lightnings turned inside the descending Messerschmitts with a turning radius that seemed impossible for such massive machines. Schiess suddenly found himself staring not at the tail of a lumbering twin-engine destroyer, but straight into the nose of a P-38 turning for a deflection shot. 450 caliber Brownings and 120 mm Hispano cannons, all mounted along the center line, converged their fire with terrifying precision. Unlike wing-mounted weapons requiring convergence adjustment, the P-38's nose-mounted guns delivered concentrated firepower at any distance. One sustained burst could slice a Bf-109 in half. Schiess pulled hard, his Bf-109G protesting violently at the edges of its flight envelope. The American pilot matched his maneuver, staying inside his turn. This shouldn't be possible. A 10-ton aircraft should not turn like this. Yet the Lightning remained glued to his wing. The American pilot was using combat flap settings that fundamentally transformed how the aircraft responded to control inputs. Schiess escaped that first engagement, but 3 of his pilots never returned to base. In the months that followed, he would develop specialized tactics specifically designed to fight the P-38, eventually becoming the Luftwaffe's leading P-38 killer with 17 confirmed victories. Yet even as he learned to exploit the Lightning's limitations, he never lost his respect for its capabilities. Years after the war ended, in his published combat memoirs, Schiess would reflect that the P-38 pilot who had nearly killed him during that first encounter taught him an invaluable lesson. Never dismiss an opponent based on assumptions about what their aircraft should theoretically be able to accomplish. The initial German underestimation of the P-38 stemmed directly from their experience with the Bf-110. The Messerschmitt Zerstörer, a twin-engine heavy fighter developed in the late 1930s, had been designed to escort bombers and attack enemy bomber formations. It carried tremendous firepower, 2 20mm cannons and 4 machine guns mounted in the nose, plus twin machine guns firing backward for self-defense. But during the Battle of Britain in 1940, the Bf-110 suffered devastation. British Spitfire and Hurricane pilots discovered that the heavy twin-engine fighter made an easy target. Lacking the agility for effective dogfighting, too sluggish in turning, the Zerstörer units experienced catastrophic casualties. By late 1940, the Bf-110 had been withdrawn from daylight fighter operations over Britain and relegated to night fighter duties and ground attack missions. This combat experience embedded itself deep within Luftwaffe thinking. Twin engine equals vulnerability in air-to-air combat. Every subsequent encounter seemed to validate this doctrine. Soviet twin-engine fighters demonstrated similar ineffectiveness. French twin-engine designs had been swept from European skies in 1940. Therefore, when the P-38 appeared, German fighter pilots believed they understood exactly what they faced. Another American failure attempting to build a viable twin-engine day fighter. This assessment traveled up through Luftwaffe command channels. General Adolf Galland would later write in his post-war memoir that he initially assessed the P-38 by comparing it to the Bf-110, assuming comparable weaknesses. This comparison represented one of the costliest intelligence misjudgments the German fighter arm would make during the entire war. What the Luftwaffe fundamentally failed to recognize was that the P-38 had been conceived specifically to overcome every single problem that had crippled the Bf-110. The Americans had studied German mistakes carefully and engineered something entirely original. Back in February 1937 at Wright Field, Ohio, First Lieutenant Benjamin Kelsey and Gordon Saville occupied a small office at Army Air Corps headquarters, working on specifications that would fundamentally alter aerial warfare. They designated it Circular Proposal X608, a requirement for a twin-engine interceptor with ambitious performance targets. Top speed reaching 360 miles per hour at 20,000 feet. Service ceiling of 36,000 feet. Ability to cruise economically for 1 hour or operate at maximum speed for shorter durations. The specifications appeared impossible to achieve. No existing fighter aircraft approached such performance levels. But Kelsey and Saville weren't requesting something that already existed. They were asking for something genuinely revolutionary. 5 companies responded with proposals: Consolidated, Curtiss, Douglas, Lockheed, and Vultee. Each design team confronted the same obstacle. A single engine couldn't deliver sufficient power to reach the speed requirements. Yet twin engines introduced enormous weight, drag, and control complications. Only at Lockheed, where a talented engineer named Clarence Kelly Johnson led the design effort, did the team approach the challenge fundamentally differently. Instead of trying to force a twin-engine fighter to behave like a single-engine aircraft, they accepted the twin-engine configuration and designed intelligently around its distinctive advantages. Johnson's team explored numerous configurations: push-pull propellers, tandem engines connected by drive shafts, conventional twin-engine layouts with both engines mounted on the wings. Each approach contained critical flaws. Then Johnson conceived a truly innovative solution: position the engines inside streamlined booms that extended rearward from the wings. Mount the pilot and weapons in a central fuselage positioned between those booms. Use the booms to support twin tail surfaces, providing exceptional stability and directional control. The configuration delivered several groundbreaking benefits. The propellers rotated in opposite directions, eliminating torque effects that made single-engine fighters physically difficult to control. Nose-mounted weapons converged naturally without requiring adjustable gun mounts. Twin tail surfaces offered redundancy and superior control authority across all axes. The distributed weight arrangement enhanced roll rate despite the aircraft's overall size. Critically, the twin booms created an exceptionally clean aerodynamic form that minimized drag. Unlike conventional twin-engine layouts, where wing-mounted engines generated massive interference drag, Johnson's configuration positioned engines within streamlined housings that actually reduced total drag compared to conventional designs. On June 23, 1937, the Army Air Corps granted Lockheed a contract to construct a prototype. The project received the designation XP-38. Work began immediately at Lockheed's Burbank facility in California. The prototype emerged on December 31, 1938. Lieutenant Kelsey, who had participated in writing the original specification, would serve as test pilot. On January 27, 1939, Kelsey rotated the XP-38 into the air for its initial flight. The test revealed an aircraft entirely unlike anything he had previously piloted. The counter-rotating propellers eliminated torque effects completely. The tricycle landing gear furnished superior visibility during ground operations and takeoff. The cockpit, positioned between the engines rather than behind them, delivered unobstructed visibility in all directions. The control surfaces responded briskly despite the aircraft's substantial dimensions. Kelsey pushed the prototype to 414 miles per hour in level flight, substantially exceeding specification requirements. At altitude, with turbo superchargers forcing compressed air into the Allison engines, the aircraft climbed with remarkable vigor. General Henry Arnold, commanding the Army Air Corps, recognized the potential immediately. He authorized Kelsey to attempt a transcontinental speed record, departing from March Field in California and arriving at Mitchell Field in New York. Such a flight would demonstrate American aviation capability to the world and showcase the XP-38's extraordinary performance. On February 11, 1939, Kelsey departed March Field. He arrived at Mitchell Field in 7 hours and 2 minutes, including 2 refueling stops. The flight demolished the previous transcontinental record and generated enormous national publicity. Then catastrophe struck. As Kelsey descended toward Mitchell Field, carburetor icing rendered both engines powerless. The XP-38 crashed short of the runway, a total loss. Kelsey escaped unharmed, but the sole prototype lay destroyed. The crash threatened to terminate the entire program. Instead, the accident confirmed the fundamental soundness of the design. Kelsey's survival in a crash that obliterated the aircraft demonstrated the inherent structural integrity of the twin-boom configuration. The pilot's central fuselage remained undamaged, even though both engine booms were demolished. The Army Air Corps immediately authorized construction of 13 YP-38 evaluation aircraft. By the time production P-38s entered combat service in 1942, Lockheed had resolved the development problems that plagued earlier versions. Production models incorporated self-sealing fuel tanks, armor plating protecting the pilot, more advanced turbo superchargers, and enhanced aerodynamic refinements. There was a tactical genius behind the P-38's lethal effectiveness that most pilots didn't immediately grasp. Lockheed test pilot Milo Burcham had figured out how to make this twin-engine fighter work in ways that single-engine aircraft simply couldn't match. Instead of trying to turn tighter like conventional fighters, the Lightning relied on raw speed, sudden climbs that defied gravity, and devastating diving attacks. Those twin engines provided the muscle to execute vertical maneuvers that left single-engine pilots watching helplessly from below. When German airmen first squared off against the P-38 in actual combat, they had no playbook for what they were facing. They'd trained to fight the Bf-110, another twin-engine design, but the Lightning operated by completely different rules. The rude awakening happened over Tunisia. On November 22, 1942, Lieutenant Mark Shipman, flying with the 14th Fighter Group, scored the first P-38 victory in North Africa by destroying an Italian twin-engine bomber. What followed changed everything. Lightning pilots started tangling with Luftwaffe fighters more and more regularly. German flyers quickly realized that the tactics they'd developed for battling other twin-engine aircraft simply didn't work against this machine. The shocking truth emerged rapidly. The Lightning could actually turn tighter than the Bf-109 G6 down at lower altitudes when handled by a skilled pilot. It could climb faster than any German fighter below 15,000 feet. When it dove, it left single-engine fighters trailing far behind. But the most terrifying revelation was the Lightning's nose-mounted firepower. That concentrated volley of guns could slice a Bf-109 literally in half. A single second of trigger time, roughly 60 rounds from the 450 caliber guns plus 15 rounds from the 20mm cannon, was enough to catastrophically damage or destroy a German fighter. Franz Stigler, a Luftwaffe ace who walked away from the war having shot down 28 enemies, confronted P-38s over Tunisia in early 1943, and the experience stuck with him. Years later, he described what he witnessed with surprising honesty. The Lightning possessed a turning radius we simply could not match, and it could transition from level flight into a climb so quickly it seemed impossible. We watched experienced pilots attempt attacks and then try to climb away, only to have the P-38 pitch upward and cut them down with that nose-mounted cannon. He'd learned the hard way that meeting one head-on was essentially fatal. Stigler began working out survival methods for when a P-38 had him in its sights. One desperate move involved flick-rolling the Bf-109 and diving hard, taking advantage of those initial moments when the Lightning couldn't follow the maneuver as quickly. Yet even this gambit demanded perfect timing. Should the American pilot sense what was coming, he might pitch up and catch the German fighter with a perfectly placed deflection shot. Johannes Steinhoff, who commanded Jagdgeschwader 77 across North Africa, had tangled with the P-38 often enough to form judgments more sophisticated than simple rejection, though just as revealing. Steinhoff conceded that his Bf-109s might actually have a slight speed advantage in level flight. Nevertheless, he stated with absolute certainty that any dogfight with the twin-engine fighter became a terrifying proposition because its turning radius proved dramatically smaller. The Lightning could get itself behind a German fighter's tail in seconds if the pilot made even the smallest mistake. On August 25, 1943, Steinhoff got a visceral demonstration of what that twin-engine capability meant. He was test flying a Bf-109G near his airfield at Foggia, Italy, with his adjutant, Theo Lindemann, flying as his wingman. Suddenly, roughly 140 P-38 Lightnings appeared, American fighters returning from North Africa after a raid, heading toward German air bases. 2 fighters against 140 seemed suicidal. Doctrine demanded retreat. Steinhoff and Lindemann ignored it. They turned directly into the formation and attacked head-on. Steinhoff's first burst caught a lightning square in the engine. The American aircraft flipped upside down and the pilot ejected, landing hard on the runway below. Steinhoff pressed through the formation, hitting a second P-38 before breaking away to escape. When darkness fell, Steinhoff extended an invitation to the captured American pilot to join him in his tent for dinner and drinking. They worked through considerable quantities of local wine while swapping stories about how to fly aerial combat. The American, Lieutenant Williams, according to American records, shared insights about how the United States trained its P-38 pilots. He explained that the aircraft's real advantage wasn't simply speed or weaponry. The Lightning succeeded because it could adapt. A skilled operator could harness those unique qualities to outfly virtually any opponent. The twin-engine setup that German pilots viewed as a handicap actually represented the Lightning's greatest weapon. Engine damage didn't mean the end. A pilot could shut down the damaged engine, feather that propeller, and keep flying on one remaining engine. This redundancy proved absolutely critical during long missions across the Pacific and Mediterranean waters. German single-engine pilots faced a completely different situation. Their engine got hit, and they had 2 choices: either find a place to crash land immediately or eject. Lightning pilots could nurse a damaged aircraft across hundreds of miles of hostile territory and make it home. The twin engines also generated exceptional power for pulling up vertically. An American pilot being hunted by a German fighter could haul back on the stick and climb hard, using both engines to maintain airspeed in a way no single-engine aircraft could manage. The German fighter would run out of momentum first, stall in place, and become prey for the Lightning pilot who simply rolled inverted and dove down on him. Perhaps most importantly, the layout permitted the P-38 to carry fuel quantities that single-engine fighters couldn't begin to match. With external drop tanks, these machines completed missions lasting 8 to 10 hours, covering over 1,200 miles. This range capability revolutionized Pacific warfare and made operations possible that would have been pure fantasy with traditional fighters. The most spectacular proof of this range advantage unfolded on April 18, 1943. Intelligence officers stationed at Pearl Harbor had cracked Japanese codes and discovered a critical piece of information. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the mastermind behind Pearl Harbor itself and Supreme Commander of Japan's Navy, was scheduled to fly from Rabaul to Bougainville to visit forward positions. His route would take him across 435 miles of open ocean. Only one American fighter possessed the reach to intercept, the P-38. Major John Mitchell crafted the operation with surgical precision. 18 P-38s from the 347th Fighter Group would launch from Guadalcanal, traveling 430 miles just above the water's surface to slip under enemy radar. Every pilot maintained complete radio silence. 4 fighters would strike Yamamoto's transport, while 14 more held back the Japanese fighter escorts. Mitchell led his formation off the Kukum Field runway that April morning. For the next 110 minutes, 18 Lightnings skimmed across the Pacific at wave-top altitude, their pilots using nothing but mental math and ocean instinct to navigate across endless empty water. At exactly 9:34 in the morning, precisely matching American intelligence, Mitchell spotted 2 Betty bombers with an escort of 6 Mitsubishi Zero fighters approaching Bougainville at 6,000 feet. Captain Thomas Lanphier and Lieutenant Rex Barber split away and attacked. Lanphier engaged the Zeros while Barber bore down on Yamamoto's bomber. 2 seconds of fire from the .450 caliber guns and the 20mm cannon shredded the Betty's wing. The aircraft tumbled downward into jungle below, taking Admiral Yamamoto and everyone aboard to their deaths. The operation succeeded only because the P-38 could travel 870 miles over open ocean, fight, and return without crashing into the sea. No other American fighter could have pulled it off. German intelligence analysts studying the mission felt a chill. The United States possessed a fighter with greater range than many of their own bombers. Yet the lessons didn't reach German pilots in time. Through 1943, Luftwaffe pilots continued underestimating the P-38, and the results proved predictable. On April 5, 1943, 26 P-38Fs from the 82nd Fighter Group tangled with German and Italian fighters above North Africa. American pilots walked away claiming 31 enemy aircraft destroyed with negligible losses. Captured German flyers started using a nickname for the Lightning, the fork-tailed devil, a backhanded compliment acknowledging the aircraft's deadly nature. Yet historians question whether this term ever truly existed in German pilot vocabulary. No German combat reports from that era actually used such language. The phrase may well have been manufactured for American propaganda value. What remained absolutely certain was that German pilots developed profound respect for the Lightning's capabilities, however they chose to describe it. Franz Schiess, destined to become the Luftwaffe's deadliest P-38 killer, recorded his first Lightning victory on May 21, 1943, over the water south of Sicily. His 50th confirmed kill overall. By this time, Schiess had dissected the P-38's vulnerabilities and engineered specific counter-tactics. The Lightning's initial roll rate dragged terribly through the first 10 degrees of bank. A German pilot under assault could flick roll and cut into a tight turn, stealing those precious seconds before the P-38 matched the movement and created separation. Facing a head-on pass meant the German pilot's only real option: brake hard and dive, exploiting superior diving performance to gain distance. Yet Schiess's combat records also acknowledged what the Lightning did brilliantly. The aircraft outran his Bf-109G6 in level flight below 20,000 feet. It climbed quicker at lower altitudes. That nose-mounted battery of weapons delivered devastating results, and destroying one from behind proved nearly impossible because the engines and twin tail booms absorbed punishment that would have brought down any single-engine fighter. September 2, 1943, brought action when Schiess scrambled to defend against American Army Air Force B-25 Mitchell bombers striking railroad yards near Naples. His unit intercepted the P-38 escort. The battle turned vicious. German pilots reported 10 Lightnings shot down. Schiess Bf-109G6, work number 1602, plunged into the Mediterranean somewhere between 30 and 50 kilometers south-southwest of Ischia in the Gulf of Salerno. Schiess was merely 22 years old. Across 657 combat missions, he'd accumulated 67 kills. 17 of those belonged to P-38s, the highest tally for any Luftwaffe Lightning specialist. Yet even this hardened professional, who'd specifically studied P-38 tactics, fell to the Lightning's guns. German pilots who survived pondered the irony. That twin-engine fighter they'd once dismissed as inferior had eliminated their supreme expert in fighting it. Kurt Bühligen, the third highest-scoring German pilot on the Western Front, with 112 victories, looked back years later on his North African battles against P-38s. In Africa, once we were 6 and encountered 8 P-38s and shot down 7. The P-38 and the B-24 Liberator, he claimed, were both easy to ignite. Yet his own assessment contained more nuance than pure dismissal. He acknowledged that in experienced hands, the P-38 became genuinely dangerous. Those 7 victories came against inexperienced American pilots making fundamental tactical blunders. When Lightning pilots knew their machine's capabilities, outcomes shifted dramatically. By late 1943, German fighter pilots had accumulated exhaustive knowledge about the P-38's advantages and shortcomings. Intelligence sections prepared comprehensive manuals on effective combat tactics. Attack from above and behind whenever feasible, applying superior diving speed to disengage if the Lightning responded with a turn. Never attempt head-on passes where the concentrated nose-mounted guns provided overwhelming superiority. Resist turning fights at low altitude where the Lightning's superior power to weight gave it every advantage. If trapped in a turning engagement, flick roll and dive straight away rather than competing for turn radius. Exploit the Bf-109's superior diving characteristics to break clear when overwhelmed. The P-38 suffered from compressibility effects in vertical dives that prevented pilots from pursuing effectively. Most critically, never assume a two-engine fighter was an easier target. That assumption had already killed far too many good pilots. Yet even as German flyers refined their anti-P-38 doctrine, American industry delivered upgraded versions with capabilities previous models couldn't match. The P-38J entering service in August 1943 brought substantial enhancements. Hydraulically assisted ailerons represented the most significant. German pilots had built their survival tactics around the Lightning's sluggish initial roll response. That weakness largely vanished. The J also featured dive brakes deployable at high speed, preventing the compressibility problems that once kept Lightning pilots cautious in steep dives. Earlier variants forced pilots to endure rising control pressures as the machine approached sonic speeds. With dive brakes, P-38 pilots could pursue German fighters all the way down. Subsequent J models brought improved heating systems to the cockpit. The earlier Lightning's cockpit temperature was brutally cold during high-altitude European combat. Above 26,000 feet over Germany, pilots shook violently from cold. Fingers and toes went numb. Frostbite became common. Pilots sometimes emerged from the cockpit so weakened by cold exposure they needed assistance getting down. The problem originated from the cockpit's position between the engines rather than behind them. Warm air had to travel outboard toward the wing roots, delivering practically nothing to the pilot compartment. Better heating systems in later models transformed European operations, making the Lightning far more combat effective. Still, the P-38 never matched its Mediterranean and Pacific success when fighting over Europe. Multiple factors explained this disparity. European air combat happened at extreme altitudes, regularly above 20,000 feet, often exceeding 30,000. At those heights, the Lightning's Allison engines with their turbochargers simply couldn't keep pace with Rolls-Royce Merlin-powered P-51 Mustangs or the latest German fighters. The North American P-51 Mustang, arriving in growing numbers through early 1944, delivered superior high-altitude speed, better range, and easier maintenance. Mustangs returned 3.3 miles per gallon, while Lightnings barely reached 1.8. That fuel efficiency advantage gave Mustangs a combat radius exceeding 700 miles, far enough to escort bombing formations anywhere across Germany. By summer 1944, European Lightning squadrons were converting to Mustangs. The 55th Fighter Group, which had piloted P-38s since October 1943, transitioned to P-51Ds in July 1944. Pilots showed mixed feelings about the switch. They praised the Mustang's performance, yet missed the reassurance of two engines and the Lightning's rock-solid gun platform. Robin Olds, who finished his tenure in the 8th Air Force flying the last operational P-38As, later reflected on the experience of commanding both types. Flying P-38Js, he downed 5 German fighters on separate missions across France and Germany. After switching to P-51s, he accumulated 7 additional kills. Following World War II, Olds transitioned to F-4 Phantom IIs over Vietnam, ultimately retiring as a brigadier general with 16 total victories across his long career. According to Olds, the P-38 represented something truly exceptional for pilots with genuine expertise. These aviators recognized both its remarkable strengths and its demanding limitations. The pair of engines didn't just provide backup power, they delivered a level of thrust and redundancy that no single-engine fighter could hope to replicate. The weapons mounted in the nose cone unleashed truly devastating firepower, but flying this machine effectively demanded more finesse than the P-51 required, and keeping it battle-ready demanded considerably more attention and resources. Across the Pacific Theater, where engagements unfolded at lower altitudes and the ability to reach distant targets proved absolutely critical, the P-38 remained supreme. The two highest-scoring American aces, Major Richard Bong with 40 victories and Major Thomas Maguire with 38, flew nothing but P-38s throughout their entire careers. Every single kill they recorded came against Japanese fighters. Bong, who made it through the war only to lose his life piloting an experimental P-80 jet in August 1945, personified the bold, daring approach that made Lightning pilots so formidable. He never pretended to be a sharpshooter, He admitted openly that accuracy wasn't his strong suit. Instead, he would dive straight in until the range closed to point-blank distance before triggering his guns, sometimes rocketing through the wreckage and burning debris of aircraft he'd just destroyed. This aggressive technique made brilliant use of the P-38's rugged construction. The twin-boom configuration spread the force of impact and stress across multiple pathways throughout the airframe. Hits that would have spelled instant doom for a single-engine fighter often left the Lightning still capable of flying. Again and again, pilots nursed their damaged aircraft back to friendly territory with one engine completely dead, tail sections torn to shreds, and countless perforations throughout the fuselage. Those redundant control systems and dual engines kept pilots breathing. The Japanese, much like their German counterparts, initially underestimated what they were facing with the P-38. Saburo Sakai, the decorated Japanese ace, credited with 64 confirmed victories, later recorded in his post-war writings that when the P-38 first appeared in combat alongside the Zero, it seemed to possess little worth noting beyond exceptional speed at extreme altitudes and its capacity to dive at tremendous velocity. Japanese pilots felt satisfied during those first clashes, watching American flyers attempt to engage their Zeros in the kind of turning fights where the Zero excelled. But Sakai quickly grasped that American pilots simply hadn't yet grasped how to unlock the P-38's true potential. The moment American pilots abandoned those futile turning battles and switched to attacking methods based on altitude and speed advantages, everything shifted. Sakai described encountering pilots who bitterly resented facing these swift P-38s, frustrated by capabilities they couldn't exploit with their current tactics. The P-38 possessed an undeniable edge. Its pilot could determine when and where combat would occur, selecting conditions favorable to his aircraft and his skills. Under those circumstances, the Lightning transformed into one of aviation's most lethal weapons. Sakai's observations matched what German pilots had independently concluded. He recognized that true superiority in air combat fundamentally rests on possessing fighters that outclass whatever your adversary can field. In essence, the P-38's supreme advantage wasn't simply raw speed, or raw firepower, or raw agility considered separately. Rather, it was the synergy created by combining all these abilities, allowing the pilot to establish the precise terms under which any engagement would take place. The twin-engine configuration, which had appeared to represent a significant drawback, turned out to be precisely what gave pilots this crucial flexibility. By the autumn of 1944, as American and Soviet forces squeezed Germany from opposite directions, Luftwaffe fighter squadrons were drowning in overwhelming numbers of opponents. American heavy bombers arrived over German cities day after day, surrounded by protective fighters in massive formations. P-38s, P-47s, and P-51s fought for control of every portion of German airspace. The German pilots who had learned to respect the P-38 back in 1943 now confronted them in such quantities that no practical defense remained possible. The 8th and 9th Air Forces deployed hundreds of these twin-engine aircraft for close support missions, pounding German infrastructure and strafe-bombing transportation targets. That distinctive double-boom profile became forever linked with American air superiority. Herbert Kaiser, who would eventually reach a score of 68 confirmed kills, claimed his first P-38 kill in January 1943. Years later, he maintained that anyone flying a fighter needed to treat the P-38 with serious respect, noting that it surpassed his Bf-109G6 in both speed and maneuverability, particularly since his fighter model carried external weapons pods that degraded its performance. Johann Pichler, facing P-38s across Italian skies in 1943, discovered they could outclimb his own aircraft. German fighter pilots consistently acknowledged the Lightning's considerable strengths, even when recounting instances where they'd managed to shoot one down. The actual combat data painted a nuanced picture regarding the P-38's wartime effectiveness. Across the Mediterranean, where the Lightning suffered its worst casualty rates, German tactics found fertile ground. Many fights erupted during situations where P-38s had been shackled to tight bomber protection duties, placing them in vulnerable positions where German fighters could strike from favorable angles using superior positioning and perfect timing. On August 25, 1943, a single German unit shot down 13 P-38s in one mission from a formation of 53 Bf-109s without suffering a single loss themselves. 5 days later, on August 30th, 13 more fell to combined German and Italian fighter squadrons. Then, on September 2nd, 10 P-38s went down during combat with Bf-109s from Fighter Wing 53. Though this engagement did cost the Germans 4 Bf-109s, including Franz Schiss. These seemingly lopsided engagements reflected tactical decisions and doctrinal approaches, rather than any shortcoming in the aircraft itself. Once American commanders revised their strategy in late 1943, permitting P-38 pilots to fight freely rather than remaining bound to bomber escort duties, results transformed dramatically. In the end, P-38 pilots fighting across all theaters claimed roughly 1,900 enemy aircraft destroyed. The total P-38 losses amounted to approximately 1,300 aircraft from every possible cause, whether combat, mechanical failure, or enemy ground fire. The victory-to-loss calculation, while falling somewhat short of the P-51 Mustang's impressive figures, nonetheless demonstrated that the twin-engine fighter was anything but the defenseless target that German pilots had initially supposed. The P-38's combat legacy forced a fundamental reconsideration of how twin-engine fighters should be designed. Prior to the Lightning's appearance, most aviation professionals believed that mounting engines on either side of an airframe automatically produced inferior combat performance in dogfighting situations. The P-38 shattered this assumption, demonstrating that a properly engineered twin-engine design could actually dominate. Following the war, both American and German aviation authorities conducted detailed examinations of what had made the P-38 so formidable compared to earlier twin-engine fighters that had failed. The unconventional twin-boom structure proved remarkably efficient at minimizing air resistance while distributing weight perfectly throughout the airframe. Traditional twin-engine configurations placed power plants on the wings, generating tremendous aerodynamic interference and creating unpredictable thrust imbalances that plagued pilots. The Lightning's sleek fuselage sections and counter-rotating propellers largely eliminated these problems. The arrangement of weapons solely within the nose provided tremendous concentrated striking power, without requiring the complicated mechanical systems needed for synchronized wing-mounted cannons and guns. A competent P-38 pilot could strike targets at distances where wing-mounted weapons would have scattered their fire uselessly across the sky due to convergence limitations. The pair of engines offered something no single engine rival could provide: genuine redundancy combined with extraordinary power that fundamentally altered combat possibilities. Lightning pilots absorbed punishment that would have immediately brought down single-engine fighters and persisted in the engagement. They sustained vertical climbs and dives longer than any single-engine opponent could manage. Equally important, they could fly missions stretching across distances and durations that kept single-engine aircraft permanently grounded. The P-38's benign handling qualities made it approachable even for pilots raised exclusively on single-engine machines. Though mastering it completely demanded genuine skill and understanding, the P-38 never imposed the specialized training demands that had made some rival twin-engine designs notoriously difficult for most pilots to handle. German aeronautical engineers dismantled captured P-38s piece by piece, hoping to decrypt the secrets of its success. Yet by the moment they truly grasped what made the Lightning so effective, Germany simply lacked the industrial capacity to build competing designs. The Messerschmitt Me 262, equipped with jets and twin-engine configuration, incorporated some principles the Lightning had established, but it appeared far too late and in far too few numbers to influence the conflict's ultimate resolution. How German fighter pilots regarded the P-38 shifted substantially across the 3 years they encountered it in battle. Early dismissal gradually transformed into cautious acknowledgement, which evolved into genuine worry as American aviators learned to fully utilize their machines' capabilities. By the time Germany surrendered, surviving German aces offered thoughtful assessments that recognized both what the Lightning could do and where it remained vulnerable. They understood that beating a P-38 was possible through capitalizing on specific weaknesses. though accomplishing this required considerable expertise, experience, and the proper tactical circumstances. When flying opposite seasoned American pilots who completely understood their aircraft's capabilities, the P-38 became devastatingly lethal. How Germans reconsidered the P-38 reflected their broader awakening regarding American air power development. American factories weren't producing second-rate machines piloted by inexperienced youngsters. Rather, Americans were engineering complete weapons systems tailored to particular operational needs and then training their pilots to capitalize on every possible advantage that system could provide. The P-38 embodied this philosophy. Its designers never intended it to outmaneuver a Bf-109 or FW-190. Instead, they built it to travel farther, climb higher, strike with greater force, and withstand destruction that would obliterate single-engine fighters. Within that specific mission framework, the Lightning performed brilliantly. As May 1945 arrived and Germany collapsed, the P-38 had largely disappeared from European combat operations, supplanted by the more capable P-51 Mustang. But throughout the Pacific, the Lightning continued flying combat sorties until Japan surrendered the following August. The final tally documented over 10,000 of these aircraft manufactured. Approximately 1,900 enemy aircraft credited as destroyed. Countless deep reconnaissance missions conducted over enemy-held terrain. Strategic bombing runs reaching objectives beyond the capability of other fighters, and the assassination of Admiral Yamamoto. This record vindicated every design choice that German pilots had originally mocked. America's premier ace, Richard Bong, flew exclusively the P-38. The second-ranking ace, Thomas Maguire, never flew anything else but the P-38. The third greatest American ace in the Pacific, Charles McDonald, achieved 27 confirmed kills flying his personal P-38, painted with the name Put Put Maru. These three men demonstrated conclusively that in proficient hands, the twin-engine Lightning matched or exceeded any fighter anywhere in the conflict. German aces who endured the war and subsequently relocated to America would encounter P-38s displayed at exhibitions and aviation museums. Their reactions illustrated the profound respect that first-hand combat experience had instilled. Franz Stigler, the accomplished ace who had warned fellow pilots never to conduct a frontal assault on a P-38, journeyed to the National Air and Space Museum in Ohio during 1986. He spent nearly 60 minutes carefully studying the museum's Lightning, scrutinizing the nose-mounted cannon arrangement, examining the twin-boom structure, analyzing the landing gear configuration. When a museum staff member inquired what impression the aircraft made upon him, Stigler answered that this represented the most inventive fighter design produced anywhere during the entire war. He acknowledged that German engineering had remained too conventional, too wedded to established design principles. The Americans possessed the boldness to attempt something truly unconventional, and their gamble had succeeded spectacularly. Johannes Steinhoff, who personally destroyed 4 P-38s during a single air battle across Italian territory, reflected in post-war conversations that he deemed the Lightning the most menacing Allied fighter he ever encountered. This declaration astonished many who knew Steinhoff had also tangled with Spitfires, Mustangs, and Soviet fighters throughout his career. Yet Steinhoff explained his reasoning. The P-38's combination of extended range, powerful armament, and ability to absorb damage created a threat unlike any other. A Spitfire or Mustang might prevail in a close dogfight, Steinhoff observed, but the P-38 could approach from anywhere, assault from unexpected directions, absorb your counterattack, and depart to engage another day. This multifaceted capability rendered it more dangerous than single-engine opponents with superior performance in particular narrow areas. What German aces understood through fighting the P-38 transcended simple matters of aviation. They had anticipated that American engineering and tactical approaches would adhere to predictable conventions. When Americans fielded innovations such as the twin-boom configuration, German pilots reflexively dismissed it as inexperienced fumbling. Combat operations revealed how profoundly mistaken this judgment had been. Americans weren't bumbling amateurs. Rather, they approached air warfare through fundamentally different principles. embracing experimental approaches whenever those methods offered genuine tactical superiority. This embrace of innovation, this practice of constructing aircraft optimized for distinct operational roles rather than following template designs, permeated American aviation throughout the Second World War. The P-38 illustrated this principle especially vividly, though it represented only one example among many. By the time German aces fully comprehended what the Lightning represented, Allied air dominance had become absolute. American and British aircraft ruled German skies completely. The Luftwaffe's finest remaining pilots were deceased, imprisoned, or incapable of flying due to fuel rationing. The twin-engine machine they had once ridiculed was ravaging German industrial capacity and transportation infrastructure completely unopposed. Looking back at the complete picture, the P-38 Lightning succeeded in precisely the manner its creators had envisioned. It equipped the American Army Air Forces with a fighter capable of accomplishing missions beyond the reach of single-engine machines. Its unconventional design, derided by German pilots initially, demonstrated itself to be genuinely revolutionary rather than foolish. The dual engines that appeared to represent a fundamental weakness actually embodied the Lightning's greatest asset. They delivered redundancy, tremendous power, exceptional range, and durability that reshaped aerial combat methodology. German aces acquired this knowledge painfully, engagement after engagement. Certain understandings arrive only through combat itself. For Luftwaffe pilots during 1942 and 43, the P-38 Lightning delivered one of the conflict's harshest lessons. Never permit assumptions about enemy capabilities to override observable reality. The stranger twin-boom design that violated fundamental principles of German fighter doctrine proved astonishingly deadly within the hands of accomplished American aviators. The evidence of this effectiveness wasn't found in theoretical specifications or engineering projections. Instead, it appeared starkly in historical records of actual victories that nobody could dispute. By the moment Germany surrendered, no Luftwaffe pilot characterized the P-38 as an easy opponent. They had developed genuine respect for the Lightning's true capabilities, educated by the cruelest instructor imaginable. Real combat experience. The P-38 Lightning represents a powerful illustration of how innovation transforms warfare. Lockheed's engineering team had produced something truly original, an aircraft that addressed problems through methods nobody had previously attempted. German pilots, who once dismissed the photographs of this peculiar twin-boom aircraft, eventually developed specialized fighting techniques specifically designed to counter it, grudgingly recognizing its advantages even while attempting to find exploitable weaknesses. Several German aces who returned from the war often contemplated their encounters with the Lightning. Names like Franz Stiegler and Johannes Steinhoff produced extensive written accounts in their post-war books. Many others shared their stories through interviews conducted decades later. Their recollections consistently documented a pattern moving from contempt toward genuine respect. Through combat achievements that forced even Luftwaffe's most capable aviators to fundamentally revise their convictions about twin-engine fighters, the P-38 had earned lasting credibility. Beyond simply accumulating impressive victory counts, the Lightning accomplished something considerably more consequential. It demonstrated conclusively that innovative designs could flourish when they properly leveraged the inherent strengths of their configuration. Those engines that German pilots had dismissed as a handicap ultimately proved a devastating strength. This understanding influenced fighter development across the subsequent 5 decades following World War II. Subsequent twin-engine fighters, including the F-4 Phantom II, the F-14 Tomcat, and the F-15 Eagle, all trace their design philosophy directly to principles the P-38 had established. Tremendous power, vast range, superior survivability, and substantial weapons capability carry greater importance than conforming to conventional single-engine formulas. German aviators who underestimated the P-38 acquired this knowledge in the most difficult classroom conceivable. In actual combat, opposing adversaries completely versed in exploiting their machine's full potential. That unusual twin-boom profile, which looked so perplexing in intelligence briefing photographs, turned out to be the actual appearance of contemporary air warfare. The Lightning's destructive presence echoed through 36 months of fighting from the northern Atlantic to Japan's territory. Within that violence and thunder, German aces perceived a message impossible to disregard. Innovation defeats established thinking. Conventional assumptions lead to defeat. They had misjudged the P-38 Lightning. Only afterward did they recognize those twin engines represented lethal capability. Understanding came far too late to reverse the conflict's trajectory, though it profoundly altered their comprehension of what aerial combat could accomplish. That strange American fighter bearing two engines and distinctive twin structures had fundamentally transformed the rules governing air warfare. And German pilots paid dearly for failing to anticipate that transformation.